When Keanu Reeves heard his dog, Blaze, barking frantically at the wall, he had no idea it would lead to the discovery of a child trapped inside. What began as an unsettling noise in the dead of night quickly spiraled into a dangerous chase, forcing Keanu to confront a deadly conspiracy that would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. Sometimes, saving one life means risking everything. Keanu sat on the couch, his mind wandering as he sipped his coffee, enjoying the quiet solitude of the night. The house was dimly lit, the only light coming from the street lamps outside, casting long shadows on the walls. But then, a sound pierced the stillness, a frantic scratching, followed by Blaze's loud barking. It wasn't the usual playful sound Keanu had grown used to. This was urgent, desperate. He glanced toward the wall, where Blaze was now furiously clawing at the drywall, his body trembling with anxiety. "Blaze, what's wrong?" Keanu muttered under his breath as he set his coffee cup down and stood up. The dog, a Belgian Malinois, was usually calm, but tonight was different. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he walked toward Blaze, trying to understand what had gotten into him. The dog's frantic barking echoed in the empty room, his claws scraping against the wall relentlessly. Keanu bent down and gently pulled Blaze away from the wall, but the dog resisted, his muscles tense, his tail rigid. Something was wrong. Keanu felt a chill creep up his spine, and for a moment, he questioned his sanity. Was it just a strange obsession, or was something deeper at play here? He pressed his ear against the wall, closing his eyes to listen. Silence at first. Then, just as his mind started to convince him it was all in his head, he heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The soft, muffled sound of a child crying. His heart skipped a beat. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. A child. That was impossible. Was it real, or was he imagining things? Blaze barked again, his eyes wide and panicked, urging Keanu to act. There was no time to waste. With one swift motion, Keanu grabbed the crowbar from the shelf, his hand shaking as he plunged it into the drywall. The sound of the wall cracking filled the air as the dust rose around him. Blaze jumped at the hole, barking wildly, and Keanu pulled back the remaining pieces of the wall with a sickening crack. The dust settled, and Keanu froze. There, curled up in the small space between the walls, was a girl, no older than 7, her blonde hair tangled and dirty, her small body trembling in fear. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto Keanu's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the girl whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't let them find me." Keanu's mind raced. He knelt down, careful not to scare her. "Who did this to you? Why are you here?" he asked softly, trying to reach her. But the girl said nothing. She simply stared at him, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Lena." That was the name she finally whispered. Keanu helped her out of the hole, wrapping his arms around her gently. But she resisted, shaking violently. Blaze, who had been beside them the entire time, sat down next to the girl, his warm body offering her comfort. Lena looked at Keanu with wide, haunted eyes. She was scared, and Keanu felt the weight of her fear. His first instinct was to call the authorities, but before he could even pull out his phone, Lena grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No, please don't call them," she begged, her voice breaking. "They'll find me." Keanu hesitated. Who was they? And why was she so afraid of being found? The cold knot in his stomach tightened, and a wave of dread washed over him. Someone had put her here, and they were still looking for her. He didn't know who was behind it, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them get to her. Keanu's mind raced as he stood there, holding Lena in his arms. Blaze, his loyal companion, stayed by her side, gently nuzzling her leg as if to reassure her. The weight of the situation settled on Keanu's shoulders. Who were these people after Lena? What had they done to her? He could see the terror in her eyes, the way she flinched at every sound, every movement. It was as if she was used to running, used to hiding. "Don't worry, Lena," Keanu whispered softly, stroking her tangled hair. "You're safe now." No one's going to hurt you again. But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Keanu's instincts told him he needed to act fast. And as much as he wanted to call the authorities, he couldn't take that risk. Not yet. He led Lena and Blaze out of the house, his senses on high alert. The night air felt thick with tension, and every rustling leaf or creaking branch seemed amplified. Keanu's eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, his hand never straying far from the gun at his side. They were being hunted. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. As they reached the truck, Lena's grip tightened on Blaze's leash. She hadn't spoken much since he found her, but Keanu knew the words she wasn't saying. She was terrified, and rightfully so. Whoever was chasing her had power, and Keanu had no idea what they were capable of. Keanu started the engine, pulling out of the driveway with barely a sound, trying not to draw attention. His mind raced through the options, his thoughts a blur of half-formed plans. Where could they go? He needed to get Lena somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't be found. As he drove through the darkened streets, the sense of urgency only grew stronger. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow. His heart skipped a beat. A black SUV. It was just parked there, inconspicuous, but Keanu's trained eyes knew better. It wasn't just any SUV. It was the same one he had seen earlier, parked outside his house, watching. Keanu's grip tightened on the steering wheel. They were following him. He didn't hesitate. With one swift turn, Keanu slammed the truck into a side street, taking a sharp left toward the back roads. The SUV followed suit, speeding up to match him. Keanu's pulse quickened, his breath steady but urgent. He had to lose them, and fast. The streets twisted and turned, narrow and winding, the headlights of the pursuing vehicle glaring in his rearview mirror. He could hear the engine growling behind him, gaining speed with every turn. He wasn't going to let them catch him. Not with Lena in the truck, not with Blaze by his side. Keanu floored the accelerator, pushing the truck to its limits. He took another sharp corner, the tires screeching against the pavement. Behind him, the SUV struggled to keep up, but it wasn't slowing down. Keanu's hands were steady as he maneuvered through the streets, his mind calculating every move. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a dead end. He had to make a choice. With a burst of adrenaline, Keanu swerved sharply into an alley, the tires screeching as they barely avoided a dumpster. He glanced in the mirror. The SUV was still behind him. But this alley was narrow, and Keanu knew it better than anyone. He could lose them here. He took a deep breath, his hands firm on the wheel, and slammed the truck into reverse, tearing back down the alley, swerving to avoid obstacles. The SUV didn't have the same agility. Keanu's heart pounded as he took another quick turn, throwing the truck into a quiet street. He didn't look back this time. He just kept driving. He needed to get Lena to safety. But as he sped away, Keanu knew this wasn't the end. They were just getting started. The people after Lena wouldn't stop, they couldn't stop. And Keanu had no choice but to stay one step ahead. Before I share this incredible story that shocked Hollywood and the military world alike, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that special connection with an animal that goes beyond words, hit that like button. Because this story might just make you believe in miracles. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he turned a corner, pushing the truck further into the night. The lights from the city were far behind, and for a moment, he thought he might have lost them. But he knew better. He couldn't relax, not yet. The roar of the engine behind him grew louder, closer. Keanu's grip tightened on the wheel, his mind racing. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the winding road ahead. But no matter how fast he drove, the SUV tailing them wasn't giving up. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the truck to its limits as the road twisted and turned in the pitch black of night. The engine growled beneath him, and his heart matched its rhythm, pounding, relentless, full of adrenaline. Blaze was on high alert, his ears perked and his eyes scanning the rear window. Lena, huddled against the seat, didn't speak, but Keanu could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on him, thick and suffocating. The last thing she needed was to be in this kind of danger again, but there was no escaping it now. The men chasing them wouldn't stop. Keanu had seen it in their eyes the first time. Nothing would make them give up the hunt. He glanced in the rearview mirror again. The black SUV was still there, its headlights blinding and persistent, closing in with every passing second. Keanu's mind spun, calculating every possible move. They couldn't outrun them forever, but maybe, just maybe, he could shake them off. He knew these roads better than anyone, and in the dark of night, he could use the landscape to his advantage. He veered sharply onto a narrow dirt path, the truck bouncing over the uneven terrain, the tires kicking up dust as the headlights of the SUV flickered in the distance. It was a gamble, but Keanu wasn't about to let them catch him. Not when he had Lena to protect. The truck skidded as Keanu slammed the brakes and jerked the wheel to the left, sending them hurtling down an overgrown trail that barely passed for a road. The truck bounced violently, the suspension creaking under the pressure. Behind them, the SUV followed with relentless precision, its tires screeching as it struggled to keep up on the rough terrain. But Keanu wasn't about to make it easy for them. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, dodging trees and rocks with expert skill, swerving in and out of the dense brush. Lena let out a breath, but Keanu didn't have time to look at her. He was too focused, too immersed in the fight to keep them alive. Blaze growled low in the back seat, sensing the rising tension. Keanu knew that whatever came next, it was going to be a turning point. They couldn't afford to lose the lead, not now. His heart raced as he made another sharp turn, the truck's tires sliding on the wet earth. He wasn't sure how much longer the truck could take it, but he had to keep pushing. He glanced back again, and his stomach sank. The SUV was still there, creeping closer. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. Keanu's eyes darted ahead. Up ahead, the trail narrowed, and he could hear the rumble of the engine from the SUV getting louder, just behind them. Without warning, the SUV surged forward, cutting off Keanu's escape. The men inside weren't going to wait for him to make a mistake. They were going to force him into a corner. Keanu slammed his foot on the gas, the truck surging forward with a burst of speed, tearing down the path. His knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, fighting the urge to look back. He couldn't afford to. The moment he lost focus, they would be on him. The moment he hesitated, Lena would be in their hands. The SUV was gaining, now only a few car lengths behind. Keanu made another turn, this time too sharp, and the truck slipped sideways, skidding off the road. The tires dug into the mud, and for a terrifying moment, the truck seemed to teeter, threatening to flip over. Keanu cursed under his breath and fought to regain control, his foot slamming down on the gas again. The engine roared in protest, but Keanu was determined. He wasn't going to let them win. Not today. Finally, the truck lurched forward, the tires gripping the ground again. Keanu slammed the wheel to the left and shot down a narrow path between the trees, the SUV falling behind. He didn't slow down. He couldn't. Keanu's mind raced as the truck tore through the woods, branches snapping and the headlights of the SUV flashing through the trees behind him. The sound of their pursuit was deafening, but Keanu kept his eyes forward, determined to push forward, to keep Lena safe, to make it out of this alive. Every turn, every move, felt like it could be their last. But somehow, Keanu knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this end here. Keanu's breath came in ragged bursts, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel with all his strength. The truck had barely avoided careening off the path, but now the road ahead was getting even more treacherous. The headlights of the SUV still glared in the distance, unwavering, and Keanu knew they were running out of time. The forest was dense, the path narrow, and the truck's engine was groaning under the strain. He pushed it harder, hoping the terrain would slow the SUV down. But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. Up ahead, the road split into two directions, one leading into a thick patch of woods, the other veering down toward a steep, rocky incline. Keanu's instincts screamed at him to take the path into the woods, but it would be slow, too slow. The other route, though, was a gamble. If he made the wrong choice, they'd be trapped. The growl of the SUV's engine behind him grew louder, signaling their approach. He could hear the tires screeching as they fought to maintain control on the winding, uneven path. The men chasing them were relentless, and their pursuit was more than just a simple chase. They weren't just trying to catch them, they were hunting them. Keanu's stomach tightened at the thought. Without thinking twice, he slammed the truck into the incline, sending it into a full-speed descent. The truck's rear end slipped dangerously as the tires struggled to find traction on the loose gravel, but Keanu kept his foot steady on the accelerator, forcing the truck to power through. He heard the tires scream in protest, the truck lurching forward in a violent jerk as it plunged down the hill. The earth beneath him was uneven, the rocks jagged and unforgiving, but Keanu's focus never wavered. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Behind him, the SUV was getting dangerously close. The men in the vehicle weren't just trying to catch up. They were pushing him to the edge, closing in with every passing second. Keanu's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the headlights dangerously close. And then, as if in slow motion, he saw the SUV slide to the side, narrowly missing a large boulder. The momentary loss of control was enough for Keanu to gain precious seconds. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The truck's wheels hit another bump, launching them momentarily into the air. Keanu tightened his grip, his knuckles white, bracing for the impact as they landed hard, shaking the entire vehicle. He couldn't afford another mistake. The drop was steep, the terrain brutal, and with each turn he was pushing the truck and himself to the absolute limit. He stole another glance at Lena, who had been silent since the chase began. She was gripping the door handle, her eyes wide, but her face was set with a strange determination. She had seen things that Keanu couldn't even begin to understand, things that were still chasing them. In the distance, he spotted a clearing, just beyond the trees. A way out. It was a fleeting hope, but Keanu latched onto it like a lifeline. He veered sharply toward it, praying the truck would hold together just long enough to give them a chance. The SUV was still behind them, its headlights cutting through the darkness, but it was far too big to navigate the dense woods at the same speed. For a split second, Keanu allowed himself to breathe. The clearing was almost within reach, but just as he thought they might escape, the truck hit a hidden pothole, jolting them violently. Lena's scream echoed through the cabin as the truck lost its balance and began to tilt dangerously to the side. Keanu gritted his teeth, fighting the steering wheel with all his might, desperate not to let the truck roll over. The tires screeched as Keanu jerked the wheel, sending the truck back on course. But in the process, the front bumper scraped against a tree, sending a shockwave of pain through the entire vehicle. Blaze barked from the back, his agitation clear. They were losing time. The clearing was within sight, but the momentary misstep had put them back in danger. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Keanu saw it. The SUV, now closing in on them with terrifying speed, its driver clearly determined to finish what they'd started. Keanu's pulse quickened, every instinct screaming that they weren't going to make it unless he did something drastic. The trees were thinning ahead, and the opening in the woods was just a few yards away, but the SUV wasn't slowing down. They had one shot, one chance to escape. With a final push, Keanu floored the accelerator, sending the truck hurtling into the clearing. Just as the SUV slammed into a nearby tree, its tires screeching as it slid off course. The trees parted enough for Keanu to see an open stretch of road ahead, a road that could give them the freedom they so desperately needed. But would it be enough? The battle was far from over, and Keanu knew the worst was yet to come. The race was on. Keanu could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him as he watched Lena through the rearview mirror, her small face pale but determined. They were still deep in the woods, far from civilization, but Keanu knew that wouldn't be enough to hide them. They were out of options, and the organization hunting Lena wasn't going to stop. Not until they had her. He glanced at the map on the passenger seat. The cabin was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where Keanu could regroup, think, and figure out their next move. But as they approached the remote cabin deep in the forest, he felt a growing sense of unease. The feeling wasn't just about the men chasing them. It was something deeper, a sense that the danger was closer than ever. Something wasn't right. Keanu parked the truck in front of the cabin, the headlights slicing through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Blaze hopped out of the back and trotted ahead, ears perked, his nose twitching. Keanu followed, keeping a close watch on the surroundings. Instincts. They were the one thing he could trust. And right now, every part of him screamed that this place wasn't as safe as he had hoped. The cabin stood alone, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But Keanu didn't have the luxury of hesitation. He pushed open the door and motioned for Lena to follow him inside. The air was thick with dust and must, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished. Just a few chairs, a table, and a dim light hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide in for the time being. Blaze immediately lay down by the fireplace, his head resting on his paws. Keanu walked around the room, checking the corners, feeling the chill that settled in his bones. The cabin was old, and the floorboards creaked underfoot, but there was something off about it. Felt watched. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something, was waiting for them. He closed the door behind him and locked it, then set down the bag he'd been carrying. As he did, Lena spoke for the first time since they'd left the truck. "Why are they after me?" Her voice was quiet, fragile, like she was afraid of the answer. Keanu turned to face her, his mind running through the possibilities. He'd been avoiding the question himself, unsure how to answer. But he knew now, more than ever, it was time to face the truth. "Lena," he began, his voice soft but firm. "The people who are looking for you, they're not just criminals. They're something much worse. They have resources, connections, and they can make people disappear without a trace. They've been watching you for a long time, and I don't know why yet, but I will find out." Lena nodded, her eyes cast downward, as if she was trying to process his words. She was barely holding it together, and Keanu knew it. He had to stay strong for both of them, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they weren't safe here. Not anymore. Just as he started to turn toward the window, there was a knock at the door. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, but it echoed through the cabin, filling the silence with a sudden tension. Keanu's instincts flared. Who the hell was it? The last thing they needed was anyone else showing up. He motioned for Lena to stay back as he crept toward the door, his gun hidden under his jacket. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. He pressed his ear to the door, listening, but heard nothing else. No voices, no footsteps, just the eerie stillness of the forest. With a slow, deliberate motion, Keanu peered through the peephole. His breath caught in his chest. Standing outside was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and a heavy coat. But what caught Keanu's attention was the cold, calculating look in the man's eyes. The man wasn't here by chance. He was here because he knew exactly who they were. Keanu's hand tightened around the doorknob, his mind racing. He couldn't let this man in. He couldn't let anyone in. Not now. But at the same time, there was something about the man's presence that seemed familiar. Keanu had seen him before. Somewhere. But where? The man knocked once more, this time with force, his voice low and gravelly. "I know you're in there, Keanu. Let me in." Keanu froze. How did he know his name? Lena had been watching from behind him, her face pale as she caught the look in Keanu's eyes. She was trembling now, her hand clasped tightly around Blaze's collar. Keanu turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay back. I'll handle this." Lena nodded, but Keanu could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't want him to go out there, and for the first time since he found her, Keanu wasn't sure what he was up against. But the man knew his name, and that meant trouble. Real trouble. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart, and opened the door. The man didn't waste any time. Before Keanu could even react, the man stepped inside, his gaze sharp and calculating. "I know you're not stupid enough to believe you can keep running forever, Keanu. Keanu's fingers tightened on the grip of his gun. "Who the hell are you?" The man smiled. A cold, predatory grin that made Keanu's blood run cold. "I'm someone who's been keeping an eye on you. And her." He nodded toward Lena, who was now standing at the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "We've been looking for her for a long time. And now, thanks to you, we finally found her." Keanu took a step forward, his gun aimed at the man's chest. "If you think for 1 second I'm handing her over, you're mistaken." The man's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "You're not in control here, Keanu. You're just a pawn in a much bigger game. And this game, it's one you can't win." Keanu's pulse raced as he stared down the barrel of the gun, but he didn't waver. This man was a part of something bigger, something Keanu couldn't quite understand yet. But he would. He had no choice. For Lena, for Blaze, he would do whatever it took to protect them. The man stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not here to fight you, Keanu, but you're making a mistake if you think you can keep running. They won't stop until they have her." Keanu's grip on the gun tightened. Who was they? And why were they so determined to find Lena? The man turned toward the door, casting one last, ominous glance over his shoulder. "You'll see soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you'd never crossed them." As the man disappeared into the night, Keanu closed the door, his heart still racing. He turned to Lena, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Who was that?" she whispered, barely audible. Keanu didn't answer. He couldn't. But he knew one thing for sure. They were no longer safe here. The storm was coming, and Keanu was determined to face it head-on, whatever the cost. Keanu stood by the door, his hands still gripping the gun, his heart pounding in his chest. The words the stranger had spoken echoed in his mind. They won't stop until they have her. The man had made it clear that Lena was more than just a runaway child. She was part of something dark, something Keanu still couldn't fully comprehend. And the people after her, they were far from ordinary. Lena's soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Keanu, what's going to happen to me?" She stood in the dim light, her small body trembling, her wide eyes filled with a fear that wasn't just about the chase. They were deeper, more haunted. It was the fear of something she didn't understand fully either, but she knew it was coming for her. Keanu walked over to her, his footsteps heavy. He crouched down to her level, his face soft but resolute. "Lena," he began, his voice low, steady. "I'll protect you, no matter what. They might have power, but I won't let them take you." But as he looked into her eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he might not be able to save her. The thought chilled him. Lena nodded, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "I don't think you can," she whispered, looking down at Blaze, who was lying beside her, sensing the gravity of the moment. "I've been running all my life. I don't think I can keep running anymore." Keanu's chest tightened. For the first time, he saw just how broken she was. Lena wasn't just a scared little girl. She had been scarred by a past too dark to understand fully, a past that had shaped her into someone who knew the world wasn't safe, who knew that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Keanu didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let this be her end. He had fought to find her, to protect her, and now he had to face the reality of the situation. He couldn't win this battle alone. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the night felt oppressive, suffocating, as though the very air was holding its breath for what was to come. The world felt so small, so fragile, as if it was about to collapse around them. Keanu pulled Lena into his arms, the weight of their reality pressing down on him. He had no plan, no escape. The enemies they faced were too powerful, too deeply entrenched in the shadows. But he couldn't let her fall into those hands. He wouldn't. "We're not alone," Keanu whispered, more to himself than to her. "We've got each other and we've got Blaze. We'll figure this out. I promise you, Lena. I'm not letting you go." For the first time since they'd met, Lena let her guard down. Her body sagged in his arms, the weight of her fear and exhaustion too much to bear. But still, she clung to him, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt as if he were her lifeline. Keanu looked at Blaze, who now stood up, his head low but his eyes fierce, sensing the resolve in Keanu. The dog had been with him through everything, through the countless battles and endless hours of danger. In Blaze, Keanu saw the same loyalty, the same fierce protection that he felt. This wasn't just about protecting a child anymore. It was about fighting for something bigger than all of them, for hope. For a future where Lena could be free of the nightmare chasing her. But Keanu knew, deep down, that their time was running out. The people who wanted Lena were relentless. And no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't outrun their reach. They would come for her, come for both of them, until there was nowhere left to hide. That night, as they sat huddled together in the cabin, Keanu couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the whispers of the wind, the distant echo of their pursuers' footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. He knew the end was near. They were getting closer. And no matter how hard he tried, Keanu couldn't protect her forever. But what he could do was give her one final chance to live. A life away from the fear, away from the people who wanted to control her. He would help her disappear. He would give her a chance at freedom, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had. The next morning, Keanu woke up early, before the sun had risen. He looked at Lena, still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Blaze was curled up at her feet, guarding her. Keanu took one last long look at the cabin, the place that had been their refuge for so short a time. It was time. They couldn't stay here anymore. The danger was too great, and the walls were closing in. He had a plan, an escape route, a way out of the country. He had made a few calls. He had connections, people who owed him favors. It was their only shot. As he packed their things, Lena woke up, rubbing her eyes, still groggy. She looked at Keanu, her face soft but sad. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice low, as if she already knew the answer. "Somewhere safe," Keanu said, his voice firm. "Somewhere you can start over. A new life. One where they can't hurt you." She didn't ask more questions, didn't protest. She just nodded, her eyes still filled with doubt. Keanu knew she didn't believe it would be that simple, but he had to make her believe. Together, they stepped outside, the cold wind biting at their skin. Keanu led the way, with Blaze faithfully following behind them, his tail wagging in quiet determination. They didn't look back. They couldn't afford to. As they walked into the unknown, Keanu couldn't help but feel a heavy sadness in his heart. He had tried so hard to protect her, to save her from the monsters lurking in the shadows. But even now, as they walked toward an uncertain future, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. Lena would be safe for now, but the battle was far from over, and Keanu would do whatever it took to keep her that way. Keanu and Lena drove for hours, the rumble of the engine a constant reminder that they weren't safe yet. The truck, now loaded with only the essentials, bounced along the rough roads as Keanu tried to focus on the path ahead. The world outside was nothing but trees and distant hills, the kind of place that made it easy to hide. But hiding wasn't enough. They were always one step ahead of danger, always waiting for the next threat to come crashing down. Lena sat quietly beside him, staring out the window. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was more a shared understanding, the weight of their unspoken fears pressing down on them both. Blaze, ever vigilant, sat at their feet, his eyes scanning the road ahead, just as alert as Keanu. As they neared the border, Keanu's mind began to race. He had a plan, a way out, but there was no certainty. The people after Lena weren't just going to let her disappear. They had power, and with that power came resources that Keanu couldn't even begin to understand. For the first time, he questioned if it was possible to truly escape them. Could they outrun the past? Could Lena ever truly be free? He glanced at her, wondering what was going through her mind. Did she feel hope? Or was she too scarred to trust that anything could ever be different? He didn't know what kind of future they were walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop fighting for her. The truck slowed as they approached an old bridge, weathered and crumbling at the edges. It looked abandoned, far from the well-traveled roads. But Keanu didn't hesitate. He knew this was the way. When they reached the other side, Keanu pulled the truck off the main road and into a small clearing. The place seemed forgotten by time, hidden from the world, just like they needed to be. He turned off the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Lena followed, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She still seemed distant, lost in thought, but there was something different about her. Something that said she was ready for what came next. "This is it," Keanu said, his voice calm, though his heart was anything but. He'd promised Lena a fresh start, a chance to live without fear, but the reality was far more complicated than that. How do you give someone back their life when the past is chasing them? Lena didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her hand resting on Blaze's head. Keanu watched her, waiting for the moment when she would speak, when she would finally let herself believe in the possibility of a new beginning. And then, slowly, she looked up at him, a small, hesitant smile forming on her lips. "Do you think I can really be safe here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu knelt down beside her, looking into her eyes. There was a sadness in them, but also a glimmer of hope, however small. "You will be safe," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you again. This place is ours, and we'll make it work, no matter what." Blaze let out a soft bark, as if to reaffirm Keanu's words, and for the first time since they met, Lena's face softened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Keanu reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise to protect her no matter the cost. But even as he stood there with Lena, something gnawed at him. The knowledge that they could never truly escape their past. The organization chasing them would never forget about Lena, no matter how far they ran. They would always be watching, always lurking in the shadows. Keanu knew it was only a matter of time before they would come for her again. The question wasn't whether they would come, it was when. But as long as he had the strength to fight, Keanu would never stop. He would protect her, keep her safe, even if it meant facing down the very people who wanted to tear them apart. They walked toward the small cabin in the clearing, the first step in what would hopefully be a long and peaceful life. Keanu had no illusions about what lay ahead. They weren't free yet, not entirely. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something that had been missing, a sense of hope. And that, in itself, was worth fighting for. After reading this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How did you feel about Keanu, Lena, and Blaze's journey? Did this story get your heart racing with excitement and tension? If you found this story engaging, don't forget to comment with a 2 below. And if you think it could have been more exciting, or if you have any thoughts on how to improve it, feel free to comment with a 7 to share your feedback. Also, don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to the Tapestry of Worlds channel so you won't miss out on more thrilling stories and epic adventures. Join our community today. I can't wait to hear your thoughts.